The world outside hasn't even woken up yet. The sky is still heavy, the streets muted, and Manhattan sits in a cold, bluish haze. Nothing feels unusual to anyone walking past the courthouse or the federal building still locked for the night. But inside the system, something irreversible has already happened. Before the first news alert pings, before the media warms up their microphones, before Diddy even opens his eyes, his sentence has already changed. And the reason? A single piece of prison footage that has exploded across the federal pipeline like a quiet bomb. Before we go deeper, what do you think this viral footage actually reveals about Diddy? Was this a careless mistake or a deliberate challenge to the system? Tell me below, and if you're new here, subscribe to the Hidden Evidence because this story is unraveling in real time. Let's get back into it. It didn't begin with shouting. It didn't begin with alarms. It didn't begin with chaos. It began with silence, the eerie, heavy stillness that only settles in a federal prison after midnight. The kind of stillness where every footstep seems louder than it should, every flicker of light feels like a warning, and every shadow has weight. Inside Fort Dix's control room, a night shift officer was seated in front of 6 glowing monitors. His routine was the same every night: scroll the feeds, glance at the time, sip cold coffee, repeat, until something moved. A faint motion on one of the monitors caught his eye. Subtle, quiet, wrong. He paused, leaned forward, replayed the feed. The figure on screen moved with intention, purposeful, controlled, careful. Not the kind of movement that could be brushed off as nervous pacing or accidental positioning. This was something else entirely. He rewound again, magnified the frame, stilled his breath. Another officer walked in, noticed his frozen posture, and drifted toward the screen. "What's that?" the second officer whispered. The first didn't answer. He just hit play again. The footage ran, and in those 10 seconds, the truth crystallized. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't fear. This wasn't a mistake. This was a violation, a serious one. The kind of violation federal inmates, especially high-profile ones, know never to attempt. When the third officer walked in, he saw the look on their faces and instantly understood. Something had gone very, very wrong. Without any debate, the clip was isolated, copied to a secured offline drive, and flagged under the highest internal urgency code, Federal Escalation Protocol. This was now leaving Fort Dix's hands. By the time the file hit the Emergency Evidence Network, the security team knew that once this clip reached SDNY, nothing would ever be the same. Meanwhile, in a dim office inside the federal court facility, Judge Arun Subramanian was reviewing late-night case updates when the alert arrived on his screen. A red-coded evidence request. Priority immediate. He clicked the file. The footage loaded. His expression barely moved, but his posture changed. His back straightened, his jaw set, his fingers interlocked tightly as he watched. 5 seconds in, he stopped the clip. He rewound, watched again, paused. There was no ambiguity, no technical error, no room for interpretation. This was an intentional breach from an inmate already under heightened scrutiny, and intent carries punishment. Inside Fort Dix, the tension grew as the warden arrived in the control room. He didn't wait to be briefed. He simply stepped in front of the monitor and watched. The footage played for less than 10 seconds. That was all he needed. His expression hardened, not shocked, not confused, simply accepting the gravity of the situation. "Secure everything," he said. "Start the chain." Documents printed, screenshots archived, logs reviewed, a new evidence file created and sealed. But outside the prison, someone leaked the clip. Nobody knows who. Nobody knows when. But within minutes, a blurry version hit social media. It didn't show the entire event, only enough to light the fuse. A shadow, a forbidden movement, a timestamp, and a caption, "Diddy caught again?" Within minutes, the clip spread. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Users slowed it down, brightened it, circled Diddy's silhouette, added commentary, tagging news pages, igniting firestorm threads. Meanwhile, Diddy slept in his cell, unaware that millions of strangers were analyzing him frame by frame, unaware that the federal judge reviewing the footage had already begun drafting a response. A response that would end the original sentence he had received. A response that would turn a legal setback into a legal catastrophe. Inside SDNY, legal staff scrambled as Judge Subramanian finalized a directive with unwavering precision. Emergency review ordered. Immediate transport required. Classification, high risk. Back at Fort Dix, the order hit the radios like a voltage spike. Officers straightened their posture as if bracing for impact. Supervisors exchanged glances filled with silent understanding. The prison seemed to tighten around itself, as though aware something monumental had shifted, and Diddy, still unaware, sat alone in his cell. He didn't know what the footage showed. He didn't know what had been sent. He didn't know millions were watching. He didn't know the judge had already written the first line that would define the rest of his life. But he would soon, because when the officers approached his door, there was no confusion in their steps. One lifted the radio. "Begin immediate transport." The words echoed down the cell block like the toll of a final bell. And at that moment, the viral footage didn't just expose a violation, it triggered the machinery of the federal justice system, fast, cold, unstoppable. The moment the transport order crackled through the radios, Fort Dix shifted into a different state, like the entire prison inhaled sharply and held its breath. What had been tension before was now something sharper, heavier, unmistakable. Officers no longer whispered. They moved with a precision reserved for moments when protocol turns into survival instinct. Inside the secure evidence room, a group of specialized officers gathered around the looping footage. This wasn't the usual shift staff. These were the trained eyes called in only when an incident was serious enough to leave the prison's control. Their faces were angled toward the monitor, brows tight, jaws locked. The clip repeated, over and over, each loop revealing the same undeniable truth. No noise, no chaos. Just a calculated breach caught perfectly on camera. Zoomed in, the details became even more damning. A subtle check over the shoulder, a measured pause, a movement timed with the swing of the hallway camera. The exact angle chosen to avoid direct detection. There was no confusion, no clumsy hesitation, no accidental gesture. Everything about it was intentional. A senior officer stepped closer, leaning in until the faint glow from the screen reflected in his eyes. He paused the clip at a moment so crisp it almost didn't feel real. Then he muttered, low enough that only the two officers beside him could hear, "It's not ours anymore." That was the moment the room changed. Because once a breach crosses a certain threshold, once it shows planning, intent, and awareness, it no longer belongs to the prison. It belongs to the federal court. A few minutes later, the heavy door opened and the warden entered. His presence carried the kind of silence that demanded focus. He didn't waste a second on questions. He stared at the screen, watched the clip from beginning to end, and the weight in his eyes said everything. This was beyond containment. "Start the file," he ordered. His voice was quiet, but it hit the room like a command carved from stone. The officers moved instantly. The internal logs began printing, one sheet after another. Earlier behavior notes, staff observations, security changes after previous incidents, warnings documented in writing, monitoring reports about distancing behavior. Each page added weight to the file that would travel with Diddy to Manhattan. He wasn't spiraling. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't erratic. He was disconnected. And to federal authorities, a disconnected inmate is more dangerous than a defiant one. By the time the final log printed, the evidence file looked less like a report and more like a verdict waiting to be spoken. At the bottom, a senior officer signed. Then the warden added his signature beside it. Then the seals were applied. It was official, and now it was out of Fort Dix's hands. Down the hallway, the atmosphere grew heavier as marshals arrived. Their boots struck the floor in synchronized steps, the kind that sent subtle vibrations through the metal railing. Officers instinctively stepped aside, giving the marshals a clear path, because once they arrived, the situation was no longer internal. This was federal extraction. Inside his cell, Diddy sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the small patch of concrete between his shoes. The faint hum of the prison lights buzzed above him. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't react to the distant shifts in sound. He didn't know what was coming. But somewhere deep inside, he felt something tightening in the air. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Not the usual scattered rhythm of guards on their rounds. This was slower, heavier, unified. Protocol footsteps. 3 officers appeared outside his cell door, stopping with a precision that made the space feel colder. Behind them, 2 U.S. Marshals stood in rigid silence, their heavy vests and steady expressions revealing exactly how serious this situation had become. The lead officer slid the key into the lock. The metallic clank echoed sharply. "Stand up," he said quietly. Not angry, not rushed, just final. Diddy rose with a slow, weighted motion. His wrists were brought forward, cuffs clicked into place with unforgiving precision. His ankles were secured, the chain between them forcing short, controlled steps. As the marshal stepped in to take custody, the officer who had first reviewed the footage lowered his voice and murmured almost to himself, almost like he didn't want it documented. "This is where everything changes." The escort began. Diddy moved down the corridor, guided, surrounded, absorbed into the formation of marshals who flanked him. Cells on either side came alive as inmates gripped their bars, watching silently. There was no sarcasm, no taunting, no whispered jokes, just a heavy understanding. Because even prisoners know when the system has shifted from discipline to destiny. Each steel door they passed through opened with a hydraulically charged hiss and closed with a loud, echoing click behind them, like the building was swallowing each moment. The deeper they moved, the colder the air became. Finally, the escort reached the last door. It slid open. The transport corridor stretched out in front of them, long and dimly lit, lined with reinforced walls and security lights that flickered with a faint pulse. And at the far end waited the van. It wasn't the usual vehicle used for court visits or short-distance transfers. This one was heavily reinforced, matte black, and flanked by 3 marshals. Its presence alone made the space feel narrower. Diddy said nothing. The marshals guided him inside. When he stepped in, the metal floor vibrated faintly beneath his shackles. The restraints were secured to the floor anchors. 2 marshals took their seats beside him. The doors closed with a deep, echoing thud, a sound that didn't just end the moment it erased whatever came before it. A few seconds passed. Then the engine rumbled awake. The van rolled forward, slow at first, then faster as it passed through the final gate. The federal convoy formed instantly around it, 2 lead vehicles, one following close behind. The prison gates closed behind them. And just like that, Diddy left Fort Dix not as an inmate on a routine transfer, but as a man being delivered into a courtroom that had already seen the footage. A courtroom that had already made space for him. A courtroom waiting for the only thing left. A sentence that could no longer be delayed. Inside the van, the cold morning light flickered across the window. Diddy watched his faint reflection. Not powerful, not feared, not untouchable. Just a man being driven into the point of no return. And Manhattan was getting closer. The convoy slipped into Manhattan like a shadow unseen, unannounced, unstoppable. The streets above were beginning to stir, but down in the underground levels of SDNY, the atmosphere was already sharp enough to cut through. Fluorescent lights hummed with a cold intensity. Security doors buzzed and clicked in tight intervals. Every marshal who moved through the corridor walked with the awareness that what was arriving wasn't routine. The transport van rolled to a halt. The engine vibrated softly, then went silent. 2 marshals stepped out first. Then the rear doors opened. A blast of concrete cold air swept inside. "Bring him out." Diddy stepped down slowly, shackles clinking against the metal. His head stayed lowered, not out of defiance, not out of fear, but because the crushing weight of the unknown pressed down on his shoulders like iron. He wasn't walking into a hearing. He was walking into a reckoning. The marshals tightened their formation around him, boots striking the floor in synchronized rhythm as they led him through the narrow underground corridor. Thick support pillars cast long shadows across the walls. Every inch felt like the inside of a fortress built for moments just like this. They reached the elevator. A key card beeped. The chrome doors opened. Inside the small metal box, Diddy lifted his eyes just enough to see his reflection. The man staring back didn't look like the mogul who once commanded stages, stood under bright spotlights, or signed multi-million-dollar deals. He looked like a man hollowed out by consequence. The doors opened again. Upstairs, the hallway was brighter, but colder. Marshals lined the corridor from wall to wall, standing shoulder to shoulder, a silent formation of authority. Not one of them reacted to Diddy's presence, not a glance, not a whisper. He wasn't a celebrity here. He wasn't an icon. He wasn't a name known across the world. He was just an inmate being escorted toward judgment. Every step he took seemed to echo deeper than the last, bouncing off marble floors and tall walls that had heard countless verdicts before him. At the end of the hallway, two tall wooden doors waited. Soft light spilled from underneath. Inside, movement stirred. A marshal stepped forward, placed his hand on the door, and pushed it open. The courtroom felt like a sealed vault of silence. No public seating, no cameras, no murmuring crowd. Only essential personnel sat inside prosecutors with thick folders in front of them, marshals at the perimeter, a clerk readying documents, and Judge Arun Subramanian seated at the bench. Posture tall, expression unreadable. Every person in the room turned toward the doors, but not with curiosity, with the solemn finality of people witnessing the last page of a story. Diddy faltered for half a step, just enough to show the human weight in his legs, then continued forward with the marshals guiding him gently. Chains rattled once as he sat at the defense table. Judge Subramanian didn't speak yet. He didn't even move. He simply looked at Diddy for a long, immeasurable moment, a silence that said more than any opening statement. Then finally he leaned forward. "Mr. Combs," he began, voice calm, steady, unwavering. Diddy lifted his eyes. "They gave you structure," the judge said. "They gave you boundaries. They gave you the opportunity to correct your path. You were warned explicitly after your previous violation that any further breach would be escalated directly to federal review." His tone didn't rise. It didn't sharpen. It simply carried the inevitable weight of documented truth. "And yet," he continued, "you committed the same violation again, this time with planning, this time with knowledge, this time with complete awareness of the consequences." A prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the footage clearly depicts deliberate misconduct. It reflects not confusion or stress, but calculated defiance of federal correctional authority." The judge nodded once, signaling acknowledgement, then looked back to Diddy. "What concerns this court," he said, voice lowering slightly, "is not only the action itself, but the state of mind behind it." He tapped the still frame clipped to the front of the evidence file. "You acted without fear, without hesitation, without comprehension of the gravity of your choices." He closed the file slowly, a soft, deliberate movement that felt heavier than a slammed gavel. This demonstrates a disconnect from consequence that this court cannot ignore. He inhaled. The courtroom felt like it held the breath with him. "Mr. Combs, please stand." Two marshals moved closer as Diddy rose. The chains tightened around his wrists and ankles. The silence grew thicker. Even the ventilation hum seemed to vanish. Judge Subramanian delivered the words with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "Due to your repeated and escalating violations of federal correctional protocol, due to the evidence contained in the viral footage, due to your failure to respond to disciplinary measures, and due to your increasing risk to institutional security," he paused, a pause heavy enough to mark the end of something. "This court hereby upgrades your sentence to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The silence that followed didn't feel like silence. It felt like collapse. Diddy's head bowed, his shoulders drew inward. His breath stuttered once, caught in his throat, and broke into a quiet exhale. His knees nearly gave out. A marshal caught his arm, holding him upright with a steady, controlled grip. But the judge continued. "You will be transferred under maximum security classification," he said gently. "There will be no appeal." He set the pen down. The file closed with a soft thud. That soft thud felt like a door closing forever. Tears gathered in Diddy's eyes, held there by the shock locking his expression in place. They didn't fall not yet, but the shine alone was enough to show the reality sinking in. The marshals guided him backward. He didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't speak. He simply moved as if the world around him had faded into background noise. The courtroom doors opened. The marshals led him out. Chains dragged softly behind him, a faint metallic whisper marking the end of one life and the beginning of a very different one. The doors closed. The silence that followed felt like a final sentence carved into stone. And with that, the federal system had spoken. If this shook you, if you want the next revelations, the hidden evidence, the deeper layers behind what's unfolding, subscribe to the hidden evidence, hit like, drop your theories below, and turn on notifications because the next video, it's even darker.